Hi, BookTube. This is sort of the second half of my Friday reads. I'm going to talk about this book, Tim O'Brien in the Lake of the Woods, which was a buddy read with Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Kelly, Books I'm Not Reading, which we completed, we completed this weekend. And obviously, I don't know if they're going to post videos about it. I don't want to speak for them, but I think judging by our exchange of comments on Voxer, we were all reasonably blown away by this. And in my case, I was blown away to the point that this would definitely get into my all-time top 20 books. Now, I'd read Tim O'Brien's and Things They Carried, and I really liked that a lot. But I sort of had him pegged down as this is the Vietnam vet guy. That was his piece de resistance. He's not going to top that. And I never read anything else. And I've picked this up, and yes, it's a Vietnam vet themed story, but it surpasses even the Things They Carried. The Things They Carried had some very strong literary ideas. This has strong literary ideas and is incredibly literary. This is a supreme work of craftsmanship, of how the novel is put together, how it is layered, how imagery sort of is set down and then repeats and then, is slightly changed in its context when it appears again. It's just masterful. And it's not flashy. The writing is not flashy. It's all about craft and putting together and structuring a novel and treating your characters with, proper, due dignity and depth. It's just, I can't speak highly enough of this book. So what is it about? John Wade and his wife Kathy. John Wade is a Vietnam vet who has a secret about his time in Vietnam, and he comes back from the war and starts a career in politics in Minnesota. And Kathy is his dutiful wife, sort of appearing on all the sort of stages with him, smiling nicely. And he sort of is flying up the political ladder to the point where he's now standing for the Senate, the US Senate in Minnesota. And it looks like he's going to win, but the nature of politics in America being so dirty and the nature of the media there is that the press managed to get hold of his secret, despite his best efforts at the time to hide it. And his support collapses and he loses the election. And the book opens at the point at which he and Kathy have been offered a remote cabin in a place called the Lake of the Woods, so it sort of borders onto a lake, up in Minnesota near the Canadian border, just to get away from everything, to get away from the phone, and this predates mobile phones and the internet. To get away from the phone, to get away from the Inquisition and all of that, and to restock. What happens now. And Kathy disappears. John wakes up one morning. She's gone. She's not in the cabin. She's taken the boat out that they have access to, but that's his only clue. And the book is framed as a mystery. What's happened to Kathy? And, as it builds up, I, the reader, and I suspect every other reader, we form our own theory, because it is a sort of a mystery. And the incredible achievement of this book is that by the end, you don't know, because the four options, which are suicide, accident in that she's just sailed off and got lost, murder, that John has murdered her, or the fourth, love, that they are actually both planning to escape and leave behind their life and start again together in Canada. And they've sort of, Kath's gone ahead of John and then he will join her. And all of them are equally plausible, which is incredible, because as you go through it, and as you're offered these different scenarios in chapters called hypotheses, you have a pretty firm idea in yourself, probably revealing your own prejudice as to what's happened to her. But by the end, they are all equally likely. So that's the first bit of master sort of craftsmanship on the show here. So the chapters are organised, as I say, that you get sort of chapters called things like where the places we looked, which is obviously about the search for Kathy. The history of a marriage, which delves back into their marriage. So you get these sort of fairly coherently theme chapters, but then you get sort of much more various chapters, like which are called hypothesis, which are called evidence, where you get a lot of quotes from different people, including real life authors, who are not quoting specifically on this situation of Cathy, but that Tim O'Brien brings as relevant to the story in question. It's a bit like Lincoln in the Bardo in that use of sort of quotes from real authors and things like that. And there's character witnesses like Cathy's sister, like the couple who rented them the cabin and who live in the cabin, you know, the nearest cabin to them. Old army colleagues of John Wade. So a whole sort of gamut of people are sort of cited in here as evidence, because there is no forensic evidence, there's no sort of trace of biological evidence or anything. So it can only be built up by basically other people who aren't witnesses, but are sort of character references, both positive and negative, on John Wade and on Cathy to some extent. So there are those chapters. Then we have the hypothesis chapters, which, as I say, give you the options of these 4 different fates for poor Cathy. So that's the overview of the book. Now, John Wade, it's clearly been broken by his Vietnam experience, but as you read through, you realise that he was broken as a child, predated him going to Vietnam. That basically his father committed suicide, and you know, John Wade never really got over it. And that one of the things in his early courtship of Cathy is he stalked her. And clearly, you know, stalking is a bad thing. You know, there's no getting away from that. So just to give you an idea of how that is presented by O'Brien. Deep down inside, of course, John realised that the spying wasn't proper, yet he couldn't bring himself to stop. In part, he thought Cathy had brought it on herself. She had a personality that lured him on. Fiercely private, fiercely independent. They'd be at a movie together or at a party, and she'd simply vanish. She'd go out for a pack of gum and forget to return. It wasn't thoughtlessness really, but it wasn't thoughtful either. Without reason, usually without warning, she'd wander away while they were browsing in a shop or bookstore, and then a moment later, when he glanced up, she'd be cleanly and purely gone, as if plucked off the planet. That fast, here, then gone, and he wouldn't be able to see her again for hours, or until he'd found her holed up in the back carrel of the library. All this put a sharp chill in his heart. He understood her need to be alone, to reserve time for herself, but too often she carried things to an extreme that made him wonder. The spying helped. No great discoveries, but at least he knew the score. So there, although you don't realise it at the time, because that's quite early in the book, it's obviously establishing his sort of, you know, perverse behaviour of spying on someone who you're going out with anyway. But it's also laying the grounds that, you know, Cathy likes to take herself off and away into solitariness. She has that tendency, which later might be an explanation for what she's done. That either she's done that by going in the boat from the cabin and accidentally got lost and ended up dying, you know, as an accident, or she's done it because it's part of their, you know, she knows it's pre-planned that they're going to live in Canada kind of thing. But your natural reaction is, well, what kind of relationship, you know, what kind of healthy relationship can be, you know, have spying at the heart of it? How can have stalking at the heart of it? Cathy knows what he's doing. You know, it's described later where she's gone shopping and he's spied on her, and he manages to get her before she does, and he goes, "What's for supper?" And Cathy says, "Well, you know," because she knows that he's been spying on her, and so all that sort of, you know, unhealthy sort of prejudice again that we bring with us to the notion of stalking. And then O'Brien sort of manages to pull the rug from under our feet, because there's a reason why he has this sort of tendency to stalk, which is he did it to his father when he was a young boy. You know, his father was an alcoholic, used to hide bottles, so one of the things he was doing was to, you know, try and you know, water them down, or at least protect his father as much as possible. But it wasn't even that. It was, you know, he's trying to connect with his father, who won't connect with him, basically, because he's an alcoholic. So he's trying to connect with his father, you know, why his father won't sort of praise him for what he does, why he just seems to repudiate his son all the time. So he stalks him, he spies on him, but it doesn't work because his father ends up committing suicide. So O'Brien has sort of pulled it back a bit, this stalky behaviour, that it originated out of good motives. And yet the problem is that spying and stalking in John Wade's mind have become equated with love and trying to form a bond, and that's what he brings to his relationship with Kathy. So it's this whole time it's like a roller coaster of where your emotions sort of sit in the book. It's an extraordinary piece of work. So in terms of the Vietnam stuff, the heart of this book is the My Lai massacre, which really happened. About 300 villagers, women, children and old men, were massacred by a platoon of Marines. There was an inquiry into it back in America. The squadron leader was found guilty and sentenced to prison, but he basically only served 1 year because of the public outcry in his defence. So basically no one was held responsible for it. And My Lai is at the heart of this book, in that John Wade was part of that squadron. But he does a very good job of erasing his presence from it. Even when he was in Vietnam, he spent his last year as a sort of a clerk, and sort of tampering the records to erase him from it. But before that, he was called Sorcerer for two reasons. One, he was a childhood magician. That's what he did. In the great sort of lacunae in his life, because his father wasn't there. And, it's that sleight of hand, it's illusion, it's mirrors, it's all that sort of stuff. And he sets in his head mirrors, whereas a place he can go for sort of safe mental refuge, He can hide behind these mirrors that can distort reality to suit his choosing. So he performs these magic tricks for his comrades during downtime. So that's one reason he's called Sorcerer. The other is he's a lucky mascot for the squad, in that whoever's sort of near him while in firefights, they don't get a scratch, like he doesn't get a scratch. And of course you did have the opposite in any war, where you have a Jonah, where you're seen as unlucky that those around you end up dying. But he's not, he's seen as lucky. So he has this sort of, people remember him because of as Sorcerer, but they never really found out his real name. So when he's able to doctor the records, it's kind of hard for them to get a hold of exactly who he was. So that in the evidence chapters, when there's sort of, O'Brien has written actual testimony that was produced in the various inquiries, they talk about only vague memories of this guy Sorcerer. They can't quite place him. And it's only a combination of his political opponents and the media who dig up the real truth that sort of brings him down in the campaign. But, like so many people in the Vietnam War, he came back with mental scars. And it's brilliantly summed up in just a short passage where he's talking about the ghosts of Vietnam, the people, who've come to him at night from that massacre. Go away, he'd murmur, and sometimes they would. Other times, though, he would have to call in the artillery. He would fire up the jungles. He would make the rivers burn. So just that notion of he has to sort of accelerate and amplify his sort of mental defences to banish these ghosts, but it's phrased in the terminology of the war of Vietnam. Call in the artillery, fire up the jungles, set them on fire. He would make rivers burn. I mean, just stunning writing. I'm not going to say too much more about the war, but unlike the things they carried, it's part of the main character's makeup, but it's not the only thing. We have his broken sort of childhood. We have his genuine love with Kathy and their relationship. We have the politics stuff, and we have the war. All of these come together from a very rich character study of him, as we do with Kathy, interestingly. She goes to a casino and gambles for the first time. We find this out retrospectively. And, she catches the bug. It's not about the money. It's not about winning the money. It's about the whole feeling and the light. It's a 24-hour light in a casino because the lights are always on. It's the lights of the slot machines. And it's this quality of glow. She feels a glow when she's gambling. You know, it's her adrenaline pumping or whatever. And it's only when John comes to, you know, take her away from the casino that night that she says the spell is broken. And of course, spell is what John does as a magician. So the clash of their two worlds. She has this fantasy of opening a casino, and that is her ability to live on the glow, whereas John has two places when he's really under pressure he can retreat behind his mirrors inside his head. And the other is, and what he believes carried him through Vietnam, protected him, is what he calls the glide, which again relates to a sort of a point in magic where you're totally on it. You're just, you know, everything else falls away. You're totally in the zone. So John has those two, and Kathy discovers hers in the casino with the glow, but John breaks the spell. And this comes quite late in the book, the revelation of Kathy's sort of personal fantasy. And it's just all brought together in a really chilling metaphor where, you know, Kathy sort of says, you know, she had to, you know, they agreed on an abortion for her at the height of John's sort of political rise because it was untimely. And as Kathy says in this chapter about the casino, because she now, you know, now that the politics has failed, you know, that's all over. Now maybe she can get to live her dream, because they wagered everything on the politics, including wagering their baby, because they'd had it aborted. So the stake of aborting the baby in order to promote John's political rise, that had failed. That bet had lost. And it's just chilling in the way that he slips that into the context of having built up the casino. It's just, again, it's just brilliant. And finally, I just want to read this, you know, as an example of just how good a writer he is. So, you know, the daily searches on all the sort of lakes and sort of tributaries of you know, Minnesota, where they're looking for Kathy. The wilderness was massive. It was a place, Wade came to understand, where lost was a rule of thumb. The water here was the water there. Nothing in particular, all in general. Forest folded into the forests, sky swallowed sky. The solitude bent back on itself. Everywhere was nowhere. It was perfect unity, perfect oneness. The flat mirroring waters giving off exact copies of other copies. Everything in multiples, everything hypnotic and blue and meaningless, always the same. Here, Wade decided, was where the vanished things go, the dropped nickels, the needles in haystacks. There was nothing to find. He knew that. But he felt a curious peace looking out on the endless woods and water, like the box of mirrors in his head, the way he used to slip inside and just disappear for a while. Brilliant, brilliant writing. And again, sorry, I meant to say this as part of the war thing. When he's describing the My Lai incident, he goes, "This was not madness, this is a sin." And it's that change of tense. This was not madness, this is a sin. It's just very simple, very, as I say, unflashy, but such a powerful punch to make the point. I will say there was one flaw in the book that was never resolved, which doesn't, you know, this is a 5-star read, it doesn't take away from that, but I did just want to point it out. So, you know, all this killing is going on in My Lai, and, you know, the bodies are being thrown into a ditch, and it's just a heap of dead humanity, and the smell is, you know, it's really hot, and the flies are already starting to gather by nightfall, and it's a terrible, terrible scene. And up to that point, John Wade has only shot one man, an old guy who was raising a hoe, who he thought from a distance it was a weapon, and he shot and killed him. But as he sort of sat near this ditch, sort of, you know, numbed and just God knows where he is in his head, one of his fellow soldiers sort of looms up over him, and as a reflex he shoots him dead, and this guy falls into the ditch along with all the other bodies. And the problem I have with that is that in the evidence sections it goes, you know, they're trying to find out, you know, were there Viet Cong there, were they fired at? And the inquiry establishes that no shots were ever fired at the American soldiers. They did all this completely unprovoked. And yet, there was a dead soldier who had been shot by Wade. And surely that would have been discovered, even if they couldn't find him in the ditch because he was buried by other bodies. Him being missing from the platoon would have been noticed. And that's never really picked up on or dealt with in the book, which slightly sort of gnawed at me. But, you know, a tiny, tiny quibble, really. It's an absolutely superb book. As I say, it's an absolutely wonderful study of how to craft a book, how to plot it, how to structure it, how to deal with time backwards and forwards and flashbacks and all that sort of stuff. It treats characters with genuine depth and emotion. The relationship of a marriage is done so well, both the good parts and the bad parts. And as I say, the layering of imagery, so that when it crops up again, it's in a context such as the casino and Cathay, where it just completely flips it from what it was first time around. Supreme, absolutely gorgeous book. So I just want to talk about this book, Anne Carson, Decreation, which is her latest book, I believe. I've never read any Anne Carson before, so this is my introduction. And I don't know if it's the best place to start, because as far as I understand it, Anne Carson is primarily known as a poet. And there is poetry in here, but it's quite a mixed... a mixture of forms, of literary forms in this book. There's essays, there's a screenplay, there's an operetta, libretto if that's the right word, there's a documentary film sort of thing as well as poetry, and it all works brilliantly, I think. You know, I have seen described, I went on to Goodreads to see what other people were saying about it, and a lot of her, obviously people who've read lots of her other stuff, felt this was quite cold and emotionally uninvolving compared to other stuff, which I can't comment on because I haven't read the other stuff. But I didn't find that. You know, there's poetry to start the book, and that's mainly about the character and her mother, which is very emotional. There's I think it's a film screenplay about Eloise and Abelard, which is, you know, I mean, that's a very emotional story. That's like sort of, you know, eternal love and you know, love across barriers and separation. That is chock full of emotion. The operetta here is very full of emotion. So I didn't see that, you know, that it was cold and uninvolving. As I say, maybe in comparison to her other poems, it is. I don't know, but the heart of this book is, I suppose, starts off with 3 essays, and then there's a film screenplay about 3 women who dealt with the theme of decreation. One was Simone Weil, who I've read. One was Sappho, and the other was a sort of 13th or 14th century French mystic and declared a heretic. Let's see if I can pick out what her name was. No, I can't, but anyway. And they are all dealing with the notion of one's being and managing to escape one's being. Now, in all 3 cases, it's really dealing with sort of the relationship of the individual with God, and subsuming and surrendering yourself to God in a true way, so that you no longer, your senses fall away. They're no longer relevant. The world is no longer relevant, effectively. And there are 3 slightly different takes on that for these 3 women writers. And it's just absolutely fascinating and really got me thinking. And so I read Weil a long time ago, but sort of hadn't thought about decreation for a time. And there are contradictions at the heart of it. You know, that, you know, in order to surrender yourself to God, but what happens if, you know, God has other loves? Where does that leave you? And all this sort of stuff. And you know, I'm going to go back and reread both the essays on the 3 women and then the screenplay that she does on the basis of it, or a documentary. I can't remember which of the 2 forms it was, but this is really excellent. And you know, it's sort of part fiction and part sort of literary criticism, I suppose, but all dealing with this concept of decreation. And you know, 5 stars. And I'm going to go back and read some of her other work. Okay, thanks. Till next time.